It's not every day we get to dive into a topic that really feels ripped from the pages of science fiction.
Yeah,
But that's exactly what we are doing today.
right.
We're talking about CRISPR.
Oh, yeah, CRISPR. This is a big one.
It is a big one, and for our listeners who might not be completely up to speed,
Sure.
CRISPR is a gene editing tool.
That's right. It is a tool that has the potential to rewrite the code of life itself.
I mean, that's pretty profound when you think about it.
It really is. I mean, we are talking about the very building blocks of what makes us who we are.
Exactly. And you've brought some really fascinating research to the table with you.
I have. I've got a stack of articles here, and they all dive deep into the ethics surrounding CRISPR.
Because it's not just the science.
No. The science is incredible, don't get me wrong, but the ethical implications are huge.
Huge, absolutely. So where do we even begin with this? I mean,
Well, I think a good place to start is with the sheer power of CRISPR.
okay, the power.
We are talking about the ability to manipulate our genes
Yeah.
and not just tweak them a little bit.
Right.
We're talking about potentially making permanent changes that could be passed down to future generations.
So not just affecting individuals, but potentially impacting the entire human species.
Precisely. And that's what makes this so ethically complex.
One of the sources put it quite starkly, actually. They warned about the potential emergence of a gene ability.
Oh, yeah, I read that one too. A chilling thought, isn't it?
It is where the wealthy can essentially engineer their children for enhanced traits,
Designer babies, basically.
leaving everyone else behind and creating a new era of genetic inequality.
It's a dystopian scenario for sure, but it's something we need to consider seriously.
Absolutely, we can't just ignore these potential consequences.
No, and that's why it's so important to have these conversations now before it's too late.
Before CRISPR becomes so widespread that we can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Exactly. We need to be proactive, not reactive.
So for our listeners who might not be totally familiar with the science,
Yeah.
can you break down exactly how CRISPR works on a practical level?
Sure, I think a good analogy is to imagine your DNA like a massive book.
Okay, a book.
Yeah, a book filled with text, and that text is your genetic code. Now imagine you could pinpoint a specific sentence in that book,
Okay.
a single typo in that vast book, and you could precisely snip it out
Oh, wow.
and replace it with a corrected version that's essentially the power of CRISPR.
So it's got a find and replace tool for your genes.
In a way, yes. It allows scientists to target specific DNA sequences with incredible accuracy.
And how do they do that?
Well, they use a protein called Cas9.
Cas9.
Yeah, it acts like a pair of molecular scissors, and it's guided to the right spot by a molecule called guide RNA.
So it's not just cutting and pasting. It's not having a molecular scalpel that can rewrite the very building blocks of life.
That's a great way to put it. It really highlights the precision of this technology.
And that's where things start to get ethically murky, right?
Oh, absolutely, because even with all this precision, there are still so many unknowns.
Like what?
Well, for starters, we're still learning about the complex relationship between genes and traits.
So even seemingly simple traits like height are influenced by a whole bunch of different genes.
Right. It's not just one gene for height or one gene for intelligence. It's a complex interplay of multiple genes and environmental factors.
So predicting the long-term effects of gene editing, especially on future generations,
Is incredibly difficult. We just don't have enough information yet.
it's like making a change to a complex ecosystem. You can't always predict the ripple effects.
That's a perfect analogy.
One of the sources even brought up the Bucks v. Bell case.
Oh, wow. That's a sobering example.
It is where the U.S. Supreme Court upheld forced sterilization based on flawed eugenics arguments.
And it makes you wonder, could CRISPR be misused in a similar way?
Could it be used to promote specific traits and lead to genetic discrimination?
It's a real concern, and it highlights the need for robust ethical guidelines and regulations.
As we venture further into this uncharted territory,
Absolutely, we need to proceed with caution and make sure we're not repeating the mistakes of the past.
which brings us to one of the most ethically charged applications of CRISPR research on human embryos.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
One source presented this really fascinating but troubling dilemma.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Imagine having the ability to eliminate a devastating genetic disease before birth.
That would be incredible, right?
It would be life-changing, but the only way to achieve that is through research on human embryos.
And that's where the ethical debate really heats up.
Because it boils down to the moral status we assign to a human embryo,
Right. Some believe that embryos deserve the same rights as any human being.
while others view them differently.
And this lack of global consensus makes regulating such research incredibly challenging.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
No easy answers at all.
And it becomes even more complicated when we start talking about different types of gene editing,
Okay, like what?
specifically somatic versus germline editing.
Ah, yes, that's a crucial distinction.
Can you explain the difference for our listeners?
Sure. So, with somatic cell editing, we're targeting specific cells in a person's body,
Okay.
like, say, editing blood cells to fight a disease.
Okay, so it's kind of like a targeted therapy.
Exactly. And importantly, these changes aren't passed down to future generations.
Okay, so it's confined to the individual.
Right now, germline editing, on the other hand,
Okay.
that targets the DNA in sperm eggs or embryos.
And that means
Those changes are heritable.
so they would be passed down to any children that person might have.
Exactly, and all their descendants.
So with germline editing, we're essentially making decisions that could affect countless future generations.
Generations who have no say in the matter.
That raises a whole new set of ethical concerns, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It forces us to confront questions about consent, individual autonomy, and our responsibility to future generations.
Do we have the right to make such permanent alterations to the human gene pool?
That's a question that's going to be debated for years to come,
A debate that's only just beginning.
and a debate that we all need to be a part of. It really makes you think about what those consequences could even look like way down the line.
Yeah, and that brings up another question.
What's that?
Who gets to decide what those rules are? Who gets to write that instruction manual?
Right, like who's in charge here?
A few of these sources highlighted some groups that are trying to at least offer some ethical violence.
Oh, yeah, like who?
There's this one called the Association for Responsible Research and Innovation in Genome Editing.
ARIGE?
Yeah, ARIGE. And they're trying to provide like an ethical compass for researchers working with CRISPR.
That's good. I mean, it's encouraging to see scientists themselves taking this seriously.
Right, they're not just forging ahead with the science, they're actually stopping to think about the implications.
And there were those two scholars, Jasanoff and Herbut.
Yeah,
They had this fascinating proposal for a global observatory for gene editing.
a global observatory. What would that even look like?
So the idea is to bring together experts from all these different fields,
Not just scientists.
right? Not just scientists, you'd have ethicists, social scientists, legal experts, even representatives from different cultures and religions.
Wow, a really diverse group.
Yeah, and they would all work together to monitor the progress of CRISPR research and offer recommendations for responsible use.
So it's not just about the science, it's about the societal impact, the ethical considerations, the global implications.
It's about taking a much broader view.
One of the sources actually argue that we need to start thinking about CRISPR in terms of global governance.
Like, this is an issue that goes beyond national borders.
Right, it requires international cooperation.
We need to work together to establish guidelines and regulations that can prevent misuse.
And ensure equitable access to the benefits of this technology.
Exactly, because this technology has the potential to benefit all of humanity.
But it also has the potential to be exploited or to exacerbate existing inequalities.
Right, so we need to be really thoughtful about how we proceed.
One of the sources here tries to break down the risk-benefit analysis of CRISPR.
Oh, yeah, I think I saw that one.
They categorize it by like basic research clinical applications and then non-therapeutic uses.
Okay, so starting with the fundamentals and then getting into the more ethically complex applications.
Right. What stood out to you in their analysis?
I was really struck by the potential of CRISPR for basic research.
In what way?
Well, it's giving scientists these incredible new tools to study diseases, develop more efficient gene editing tools, identify new drug targets.
So it's accelerating scientific discovery across a wide range of fields.
Exactly, and these advancements could lead to breakthroughs in treating all sorts of conditions.
That's the optimistic side of the equation.
Right, but even in basic research, there are risks to consider.
Like what?
Well, data privacy breaches, for example.
Oh yeah, that's a big one these days.
And the potential for misuse of the technology, even if it's not intended for harm.
Right. Good intentions don't always guarantee good outcomes.
Exactly. And then as we move into clinical applications where CRISPR is being used to directly treat patients.
The stakes get even higher.
Absolutely. We're talking about using CRISPR to potentially cure genetic diseases, develop new immunotherapies.
Even explore applications in organ transplantation.
I mean, the potential to alleviate human suffering is enormous.
It is, but we also have to acknowledge the potential for unintended consequences.
Right. We can't just assume that everything will go perfectly.
There's always the risk of unforeseen side effects, and we have to carefully consider the issue of equitable access.
If these therapies are initially very expensive, who will be able to afford them?
Will we see a widening of the gap between the haves and the have-nots?
That's a valid concern. And then there's the whole issue of enhancement.
Where do we draw the line between therapy and enhancement?
That's one of the toughest ethical questions surrounding CRISPR.
What if a gene edit could make someone resistant to a deadly virus?
Is that therapy or enhancement?
What if parents want to use CRISPR to enhance their child's intelligence or athleticism?
Where do we draw the line?
It seems like a lot of this comes down to individual values and societal norms.
and those can vary widely across cultures and countries.
which makes establishing universal guidelines incredibly difficult.
One source talked about existing frameworks for managing research risk and ensuring ethical practices,
Like what?
like the Institutional Review Board system in the United States.
So those boards review research proposals to make sure they meet ethical guidelines.
But there's a lot of variation in how those guidelines are interpreted and enforced.
So it's not a perfect system.
No system is perfect, and that inconsistency in regulatory oversight is a major concern.
Especially as CRISPR technology becomes more accessible.
Exactly. It's easy to imagine a scenario where researchers or companies might seek out countries with less stringent regulations.
To conduct experiments that wouldn't be allowed elsewhere.
A sort of gene editing tourism driven by the pursuit of scientific advancement or profit.
It's a troubling thought.
It is, and it highlights the need for international collaboration.
Not just among scientists, but also involving ethicists, social scientists, and the public.
This isn't just a scientific issue, it's a societal issue.
It feels like we're having this conversation at a pivotal moment.
We really are. The choices we make now will have consequences for generations to come.
We're shaping the future of humanity,
There are a lot of statements and reports urging caution.
but some offer a more nuanced perspective.
Right, like those from the Netherlands, the UK, Spain, even the United States.
They're suggesting that germline editing might be permissible under certain very specific conditions,
They're not ruling it out completely.
but they're emphasizing a very cautious approach.
Restricting editing to preventing serious diseases.
Only editing genes known to directly cause those diseases.
Using gene variants that are already common in the population and known to be safe.
Having strong preclinical data demonstrating safety and efficacy.
And rigorous oversight and long-term monitoring of the effects of the editing.
It sounds like they're acknowledging the potential benefits of germline editing.
But proceeding with extreme care.
A number of sources also brought up the issue of enforcement.
Right, ethical guidelines are important.
But without real consequences for violations, they won't be very effective.
Some experts are calling for international laws and treaties specifically addressing gene editing.
To set clear standards for responsible use.
Establish mechanisms for monitoring and enforcement.
Maybe even create international bodies to oversee the development and application of this technology.
It's a daunting task.
But the potential consequences of inaction are too great to ignore. I mean, it's a lot to think about.
It really is.
Rewriting the very blueprint of life.
Yeah, it kind of makes you feel small, doesn't it?
It does. It really puts things in perspective.
It's not just science anymore. It's ethics, it's law, it's philosophy.
It's all of those things.
And it makes you realize how new this technology really is.
We're still figuring it out as we go.
We're grappling with its capabilities and potential applications.
And it's evolving so rapidly.
At a dizzying pace.
One of the sources made this point that really resonated with me. They said, our moral decision-making needs to evolve alongside CRISPR science.
Like, we can't just rely on old ethical frameworks.
We need new ones that address the unique challenges posed by this technology.
I think that's a crucial point.
This isn't just about setting rules. It's about having a deeper understanding of what gene editing really means.
It's about fostering a global conversation about the kind of future we want to create.
And recognizing that we're all stakeholders in this conversation.
Scientists, policymakers, ethicists, the public.
We all have a role to play in shaping how this technology is developed and used.
I think there's a sense of awe and trepidation surrounding CRISPR.
Yeah, like we're on the cusp of something truly transformative.
But we're also aware of the potential pitfalls.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the ethics of CRISPR.
What's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with?
I think it's the sheer complexity of this issue.
Right, there are no easy answers.
No black and white solutions.
There are strong arguments on all sides.
And ultimately, the decisions about how to use CRISPR will require careful consideration, open dialogue.
A willingness to wrestle with those difficult questions.
And maybe a little bit of humility.
A lot of humility, actually.
We need to acknowledge the limits of our knowledge.
And be open to the possibility that our understanding will continue to evolve.
As CRISPR technology advances.
Because it will definitely continue to advance.
It's a reminder that this is a journey, not a destination.
We're just at the beginning of exploring the possibilities and challenges of gene editing.
And it's a journey we need to take together.
For listeners who are interested in learning more,
we've included some great resources in the show notes.
Definitely check those out.
And before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, hit me with it.
If CRISPR gives us the power to design our future generations, what kind of world do we want to create?
That's a big question.
It is, what values will guide our choices?
What limits, if any, will we set?
These are questions we all need to grapple with.
As we navigate this uncharted territory.
The future is not predetermined.
It's something we create together through our choices and actions.
Let's make sure those choices are informed, thoughtful,
and driven by a shared commitment to a better future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, until next time.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep.